Join Allan and his guests for an hour of unmatched entertainment beginning September 15th at 3 p.m. on BCTV. The Allan Thicke Show, weekdays at 3 beginning September 15th.
This is Kim. Would you give 2 cents to save her? Kim is 3 years old and 3 months away from being blind. And just 2 cents worth of vitamin A could save her. Your 2 cents could save Kim's sight. So please give to Helen Keller International, Box 777, New York, 10011. 2 cents can save Kim's sight. Nothing can buy it back.
As if you didn't have enough on your mind, here come all these financial statements. There's one for your checking account, another for your savings account, RRSP, your term deposit, loan accounts. It's enough to make anyone feel like a dummy.
This is like doing an interview with Trudeau this morning. I'm always up for him, you know.
All your money management information in one tidy package. All in all, it's a neat idea.
When these walls were built, fuel oil cost 14 cents a gallon, and insulation wasn't so important. Today, many sidings can make your house more attractive, and now there's one that adds insulation too, Climatic R+. Siding with polyurethane insulation bonded, right on the back. Climatic R+, for homes that need a facelift, and more insulation too.
Poly Aluminum Shop for an in-the-home estimate without obligation. We're licensed to serve all Lower Mainland communities.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning. This is going to be a tough interview this morning. This is my first major entry into the case of Gracie's finger. And I'm going to be interviewing the Attorney General of the province of British Columbia, the Attorney General since last 23rd of November, the Honourable Allan Williams. The allegations, which have perturbed many people, not only politicians, simply put are that Grace McCarthy, Provincial Secretary at the time and Human Resources Minister now, is alleged to have interfered in 1978 in some way in the work of Larry Eckhart, who held a commission on electoral distribution, which, with what some people seem to think is unseemly last-minute haste, added a finger to the Little Mountain riding, finger claimed by the opposition to be predominantly social credit, to enable Grace McCarthy to win that riding. These are, of course, very serious allegations. There has been public discussion, controversy, contradiction, and some considerable, disappointment that the Attorney General has not ordered a public judicial inquiry. That will be my first question to the Attorney General after the break.
One of the
Okay, well, maybe we should have a Webster's,
don't take it to the studio.
I'll need my bloody glasses today, god damn it. When did we do that, our first story, Keith? January 78? BCTV, January 78.
15 seconds to you, Jack.
Allan Williams is the Attorney General of British Columbia. Since he took office in November, he's been the center of many controversies. The principal one, of course, are the allegations involved in the Eckhart Electoral Reform Commission. The story first broke in BCTV some months ago when the story said that changes had been made to the Eckhart report after June the 17th, including some kind of meeting in Victoria. And it would seem that these basic facts have now been substantiated. Mr. Williams himself said, let me put it this way, in the face, Mr. Williams, of the welter of confusion, contradiction, and political controversy, and in view of the fact that you said at one time that if there had been the slightest corroboration of Tamota's, quote, unsubstantiated allegations, you would have considered a commission of inquiry. In today's position, will you announce a judicial inquiry held in public, no secrecy, no excerpted transcripts, so that the public can see that justice is being done?
Jack, there hasn't been any corroborating information or facts which have come forward since I made that statement.
Nothing?
Nothing has come forward out of the extensive inquiry undertaken by competent and responsible officials in my ministry, which dealt with these very, very serious allegations. Serious allegations which might have provoked either a judicial inquiry or perhaps criminal charges. Unless and until I have additional direct evidence or evidence which corroborates some of the unsubstantiated evidence which has been disclosed to date, then my position must be as Attorney General that I cannot recommend to the government that there be an inquiry.
Quite simply put, will you order a judicial inquiry at this moment, done in public, without secrecy, with the public being able to see how the evidence is taken, what oaths are used? Will you or will you not, sir?
At this moment, no.
Let me put it to you this way, therefore. I have studied, as you have studied, the report by your Deputy Attorney General based on the inquiries by Norman Proluption, one of your senior officials. Are you not concerned with a number of matters which were not reported to the public in that report?
No, I'm not, Jack. And this is one thing that continues to excite people, but to confuse me with respect to the reaction. The inquiry which is undertaken was undertaken as a result of a statutory declaration which was filed, which made allegations, direct implications against Mrs. McCarthy, who was then the provincial secretary. The allegations were based upon conversations which were denied. But we didn't concern ourselves with whether the conversations were denied or not. We accepted the allegations as they were, and we traced them through, right to the very end. We were unable to substantiate them.
In any way?
In any way. The allegations are quite simple in the original affidavit sworn by Ms. Timoto, which was to the effect that Mrs. McCarthy, on a particular night, was in a hotel room, that the commissioner was present, that she pointed to a map and said, change that. We traced that right to the source, right to the hotel room. We found there was no map in the hotel room, that Mrs. McCarthy did not point her finger to any map, and in fact that the changes that were alleged to be made had been made on the direction of the commissioner prior to that time.
Let me give you a simple question. Is it not correct that with what seemed to be unseemly haste, at the very last moment, in a report dated June the 17th, that there were last-minute changes made to the Eckert report which added the finger to Little Mountain?
Yes, the finger to Little Mountain was added.
Why so late?
The boundary was changed on the weekend of June the 17th. That was a decision made by the commissioner, and his report points out why he made it. And he takes the position quite firmly in his report that in the establishment of electoral boundaries within urban electoral districts, that neighborhood communities should not be severed. And on his examination of the report over that weekend, he found that the Arbutus village had been cut in half, and he gave his staff directions to rectify that situation.
Was it not an unusual last-minute change after many months of preparation that all of a sudden, according to information, Dan Campbell, after the public hearings, sent for a commission person to pick up a brown envelope and give to the commissioner?
But, Jack, you're talking about two different matters, because Dan Campbell was not involved in anything dealing with the alleged changes in the electoral boundary to Little Mountain.
Let's deal with that one quite specific. Was it proper, and have you investigated any part taken by Mr. Campbell in sending after the public hearings, remembering, of course, his closeness to the Cabinet and the Premier, to Judge Eckert in a matter which causes, said Webster, to be careful, eyebrows to be raised, using a commission employee by name of Dale Manns?
That information was uncovered in the course of the inquiry.
Wasn't in the Deputy Attorney General's report?
It didn't touch upon Mrs. McCarthy's involvement in the matter, and as I say, the Deputy Attorney General's report to me dealt with the allegations made that there was involvement on behalf of Mrs. McCarthy.
In other words,
not on behalf of Mr. Campbell.
The vocal summary of the corruption report was narrowed down precisely to the allegations and the Tomato allegations.
Those were the instructions that were given at the very outset. I said when the declaration was delivered to me, my instructions were to consider the declaration and determine what action, if any, was appropriate for me to take as the Attorney General.
Is that not the Nelson touch? Is that not the Nelson touch by you?
I don't think I understand you, Jack. No, it certainly is not, because in the course of that inquiry, we uncovered all these other matters. And if in the course of that inquiry we had been able to ascertain that there were improprieties in the conduct of the Commission, then I would have been honor-bound to have recommended to the government that there be a judicial inquiry. But, you know, you raised the question of Dan Campbell, and let's clear that up. That matter occurred in the early part of June, just at the time that the public hearings of the Commissioner were being complete.
And finished?
Mr. Campbell and anybody else in the province was entitled to make submissions to the Commissioner with regard to electoral boundary
Mr. Williams,
revision.
if you were in opposition, would you not strongly object to a man close to the Premier, a government official, at the very last moment, and a man who has been involved in other controversies, making what seems to be a direct approach, using Commission staff to put his views in front of Eckhart?
Well, you have
put yourself in opposition for a moment, sir.
Well, yes, the opposition people members have raised these matters, and I'm not quarreling with their right to do so. But in my responsibility as Attorney General, I have to check out exactly what was done. This was uncovered. We ascertained that the judge received the material. The judge was outraged, affronted by the fact that the material had been sent.
How did we learn that, sir? How did the public learn that?
The public learned that, I suppose, in the disclosures that were made by one of the Commission staff.
Certainly not in this skimpy report by your Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General.
But that report dealt with the allegations which were made with respect to Mrs. McCarthy. The inquiry dealt with the whole other range of matters. If in the course of that inquiry, as I said a few moments ago, I had concluded that there were improprieties in other aspects of the Commission's work, then I would have been honor-bound to have recommended to the government that there be an inquiry. But, let me finish. We ascertained what happened in those circumstances. We ascertained that the Commissioner rejected the submission made by Mr. Campbell, and in fact his submissions were destroyed because Mr. Campbell had not conducted himself in accordance with the practice that was required by the Commissioner, which was to deal with these matters at public hearings.
You didn't really answer my question. Were you not perturbed when your investigation was made in your behalf to find that at the very last moment, I repeat, with unseemly haste, after months of investigation, there is a sudden addition of a Arbutus Village finger to Little Mountain? Not forgetting too that Berard had disappeared.
Well, Jack, you say sudden. The fact of the matter is that the public hearing aspect of the Commission's work didn't conclude until I think it was the 5th or 6th of June, and at that time he embarked upon the major work of establishing electoral division boundaries throughout the entire province. That went on from the 5th and 6th of June through until the 17th of June. The report was his, up to and including the date when he presented the report to the Provincial Secretary.
Which was June the 20th?
Which was the 20th of June.
Why was the report dated June the 17th then? I mean, the man was finished on the face of it. He put June 17 on his report. Scurrying back and forward, a number of things were happening. Are you not concerned by the fact that it was dated June the 17th and that there were undoubtedly important and crucial political last-minute changes?
Yes, that was also covered in the course of the inquiry.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Williams. I said, were you not concerned by that?
I was concerned that...
Does it not look bad?
It looks bad, but it isn't bad, Jack. This is
More with the Attorney General on the substantiation of Tomota's allegation or otherwise after the break. No, you don't want to smoke on there. Another ashtray, Fred, please. Mr. Williams, I'm not making a mountain out of a molehill. I'm making a mountain out of Gracie's finger in Little Mountain. But I want to take you back to a statement you made a little while ago on the original affidavit, and I'm well aware it was a hearsay affidavit via Susan Thompson to Tomoto, and I'm well aware that Preluption, your director of criminal law, civil law?
Civil law.
Civil law, told at least one witness that he wanted to hear everything. Hearsay, whatever. He wanted the lot.
That's right.
And made Vi Barton sign a confidentiality oath? Was she the only one who signed the confidentiality oath?
No. Mr. Preluption didn't require anybody to sign the confidentiality oath.
Somebody required Barton to sign one.
No. Each of the witnesses who was interviewed by Mr. Preluption was provided with a form which indicated the purpose of the interview, the authority that Mr. Preluption had to conduct the interview, and in view of the fact that many of them were public servants and had already taken the public service oath, and those who hadn't had already taken an oath of secrecy with respect to their work in the commission.
Come to that later.
Well, it was provided in the documentation that the statements that they were giving would not be used except in proper proceedings without their consent, and any one of the people who gave statements was at liberty to disclose their own statements.
It's you said.
That we wouldn't disclose any.
You said Tomoto's allegations as unsubstantiated. The Deputy Attorney General's report says that the facts and circumstances which we have elicited do not support the belief sworn by Miss Tomoto in any respect. Vi Barton states on oath and supports on oath. Vi Barton states.
That's right, not an oath.
But states.
Yes.
Did Tomoto state an oath?
Hers was a statutory declaration, yes.
So it was an oath. Vi Barton states another set of circumstances in which the hearsay is that in the presence of Mearns and Geisler Thompson, that somebody had got to Eckhart. Now, you're well aware of Vi Barton's statement. Is Vi Barton's statement not substantiation of Tomoto's allegations? And is that not sufficient reason for you to call a judicial public inquiry?
No, it's not substantiation of Ms. Tomoto's declaration. First of all, the alleged conversation to which Ms. Barton refers was denied. But again, we didn't concern ourselves.
Tomoto's allegation was denied too by Geisler, and I must make it clear that Grace McCarthy has denied each and every single allegation of interference.
That's right. She has
that must be put on the record.
Stated very clearly that
Mr. Williams,
she didn't make any representations to the commission, and none were made on her behalf.
You are a common sense man and a politician and a distinguished lawyer. Surely the presence of Barton's additional information was substantiation to some extent.
No, it wasn't, Jack, because the alleged statement was that Mrs. McCarthy had got to Judge Eckhart.
Right.
That was also checked out. Tried to ascertain from Ms. Barton precisely what was meant by that statement. She didn't have any knowledge of what was meant by it.
Mr. Williams, you know what that means as well as I know what that means.
Yes.
We deal in simple English language.
That's right, but as I say, Jack, in the course of the inquiry, every aspect of this was traced through, and the prospect of anybody, getting to the judge, was not substantiated. We have no direct evidence whatsoever that Mrs. McCarthy or anybody else got to Judge Eckhart.
Well, let me make a very basic point to you, Mr. Williams. You are the Attorney General of this province. If you were a reporter like myself, par excellence and politician, and you get this skimpy version, I'm sure Preluption's report is totally complete in every way, this skimpy version, which leads to further important public information, would you be happy with it?
As a reporter, I might not, but as the Attorney General, I have to be.
As a member of the public, would you be happy with it?
Well, I think the public is in the position where, as they must respect my position as the Attorney General, whereby in order to recommend to the Cabinet and place before a judicial inquiry a matter of this kind, I have to have evidence that is going to stand up, not just suspicions or allegations. And this may be sufficient for you as a reporter to express concern, but you have to recognize that as the Attorney General and one responsible for the administration of justice, that I have to adhere to the standards that are required in those circumstances.
Mr. Williams, there are virtually no names in this report of who was question by prolapsion. Virtually no names in this report. Of the 40 people, maybe half a dozen are named. Right?
That's right, yeah.
There's no transcript of prolaption's evidence available for members of the opposition or members of the public to see the depth of the inquiry and the responses from witnesses, including Judge Eckhart.
That's right.
Why not?
Jack, it is the practice of attorneys general in all of the jurisdictions that investigative reports are not made public, nor are legal opinions made public. In fact, there's a story in the front page of the province this morning which makes it clear why that practice is followed. You have a major case of murder in the United States which may be seriously affected because investigative reports have been disclosed prior to the
That's
to the
not
event.
relevant to
It
this
is relevant,
discussion,
Jack.
Mr. Williams.
This is exactly why investigative
Videotape.
reports are not made public. Police reports not made public, investigative reports not made public.
Will you make the transcript of prolaption's inquiries available to the opposition or to the public?
No, I will not.
What action have you taken on the allegation that at least one oath of secrecy was backdated sometime in June to the 24th of March? Have you promised to investigate that?
That's right.
I'll put it just simply. Have you investigated the allegation that the oaths were given at the wrong time, wrongly dated, with a possibility of an involvement in a criminal charge related to perjury? That's the allegation.
That's right.
Have you made an investigation of that?
That investigation has been undertaken and is still underway.
Are the oaths missing?
We have uncovered some of the oaths, but we have not recovered them all.
Is that the basis for a possible criminal charge?
It may be.
How long will it take you, Mr. Williams, to give us the answer to that simple question?
What simple question?
Your investigation of the allegation of backdated oaths.
Well, first
I
of all,
I realize it's a technical offense, but it gives one an indication of what was happening.
That's right. It's a very serious one. We are making every effort to locate every one of the oath documents that were sworn. We have found some of them. Based upon the ones that we have been able to locate, the need for backdating is unnecessary, quite frankly, because they were retrospective in the way in which they were prepared, so that no matter when they were sworn, they would cover a person with respect to their work with the commission from whenever they started. Anyway, the material of the Eckhart Commission, we find, was sent to the provincial archives, some of it, and some of it was sent to the financial control officer in the provincial secretary's ministry, who was responsible for paying allowances and for the accounts. We are going through all of that material again to see whether we can locate any of the missing oaths.
Webster and Allan Williams, more key questions on Gracie's finger affair after the break.
He's the director of the mapping branch.
That's right. The Attorney General is apparently firm in his position that despite the swirling clouds of suspicion and concern, that there is not sufficient substantiation anywhere to order a judicial inquiry. In the name of goodness, Mr. Williams, when our whole electoral system is at risk in this kind of thing, surely the only way you can clear the name of the government and the cabinet is to lay it all out on the table with a public inquiry, let the chips fall where they may, and then you can't be accused of secrecy, whitewash, or cover-up. Am I not correct in that assumption?
Well, I think that you're incorrect in the assumption that the entire electoral system is at risk, because that's not been established in any respect, quite frankly.
I said in this kind of thing, where there are allegations of gerrymandering.
Allegations of gerrymandering, as I understand the term, would be that there has been direct political involvement in the decisions made by whoever establishes electoral boundaries, and this has not been established.
But that's the allegation.
That's the allegation, but until I can have direct evidence that that is the case, then I will not put it before a judicial inquiry.
Do you know?
Now, you said how to clear up this whole situation and I suppose save my political skin or somebody else's. The fact of the matter is the standards that are applied to the responsibilities of the Attorney General, the Chief Law Officer of the Crown, are that he must keep himself aloof from political considerations in matters of this kind. That cuts both ways. I'm not allowed to be influenced by political considerations in the decisions that I make, to hold an inquiry or not to hold an inquiry. And therefore, I can't depart from the standard of requiring evidence to place before a judicial inquiry in order to save somebody's political hide. This would be a way out.
You're saying a way out would be, but the public would then have an assurance that everything had been done properly in public on oath, which it does not now have.
If I have the direct evidence of improprieties to place before a judicial inquiry, then there will be a judicial inquiry, and the public will be able to hear. But until that evidence is available to me, then the standards that I must accept as the Attorney General prevent me from recommending a judicial inquiry.
You do not accept the Barton Declaration giving some substantiation to the hearsay that there was interference by Grace McCarthy. You don't accept that.
I don't accept that. That's not substantial.
You don't accept any potential or possible last-minute injection of opinion by a man close to the Premier, Dan Campbell, as a possible matter to be investigated in public.
Didn't influence the the selection of electoral boundary divisions.
You don't accept the brown envelope transfer to Eckert and his, again, this is hearsay, outrage at receiving this brown envelope sometime in June after the public hearings?
Well, you discovered that.
No, you don't accept that.
No, because Mr. Campbell's submission was rejected by the commissioner and didn't have any part in the definition of electoral boundaries. Mr. Campbell himself admitted that when he was interviewed.
You are concerned, however, about the misstatements made by your director of mapping and by the Queen's printer when Evan Wolfe lost his cool and made what has been described as a grievous error on the initial allegations made when he responded. And if I can refresh your memory on that, there's a letter here from Mr. McMinn which is contradicted and cleared up in the production report.
Yes.
That the work was completed and sent to the Queen's printer by June the 16th.
That's
that
right.
is not correct, is it?
That's not correct, that's right.
Does that not add weight to the fact that there was unseemly haste in the changes between then and the 20th?
No, there was no unseemly haste in the changes that were made on the 20th. My concern with respect to that aspect is that a government ministry or a branch of a government ministry having these responsibilities would not keep some accurate record of the work that was being done.
Was there one report printed? The whole thing is called the interim report. Was there one report printed on June the 20th, June the 16th, and another report printed within the next few days?
No, no.
Have you checked that?
We have interviewed every person who was associated with the work of the commission through the 16th to the 20th, and the interim report, which was the first of two reports submitted by Mr. Eckert, this one solely related to electoral boundaries, was not delivered to the Queen's printer for printing until the Monday.
There is a set of sealed legal descriptions of the Eckert redistribution sitting in the survey branch in Victoria. The Surveyor General says that if you order their release, he'll make them public. You said, correct me if I'm wrong, that if thought asked to release them, he'll grant permission. Will you release these sealed legal descriptions, which will have the dates and the times on them, just so we know? Would you authorize the Surveyor General to release that sealed set of legal descriptions of the redistribution?
Well, they're not mine to authorize, Jack. They're
the Attorney General.
But I don't have any control over the legal surveys branch. I checked with the Surveyor General. They were documents which were prepared by the legal surveys branch in the normal course of their activities. Why they're in a sealed envelope, I haven't the slightest idea. They should be in the files of the surveys branch, like any other documents.
Can we go to the Surveyor General and say the Attorney General doesn't understand why you're keeping these secret?
He's not keeping them secret on any directions from me.
He may be keeping them secret on directions from somebody else?
They're part of the normal documentation in the survey branch, and they would be dealt with as normal as any documentation in that branch is concerned. And the records of government branches and ministries are not available to the public to search through at their will, unless they happen to be a registry of some kind.
Were you the attorney?
So the same with any other document, Jack. I mean, you're trying to create an atmosphere surrounding those documents which they don't justify. There's no question as to what they were. They were work that was done by the Legal Surveys Branch up to including the 16th of June. There's no doubt whatsoever that there was other work done after, and that's the situation. What was done on the 1st of June is different than what was done on the 16th, I assume, and what was done on the 16th is different than what was done on the 19th and 20th.
There were major changes in this particular electoral redistribution, right?
You mean over
major changes?
Over the entire province?
Over the entire province.
Oh, yes, no question about it. As a matter of fact, it was on assessment of the work of the Commission in this regard, I think it was quite well done.
Preluption said
in a better result with regard to the number of seats in relation to the popular vote than has ever been the case before.
Vi Barton says,
yes,
to put it correctly, that in the form she signed, the confidentiality form, that if there were contradictions, both versions would be in his report. And she got up and she blew her little piece that somebody had got to Eckhart because you got up in the House and said there was no substantiation. I'm asking you again, surely the least you can do, Mr. Williams, is release the transcripts of the entire Preluption report so we have an assurance everything was covered.
Jack, I've just told you it is not the practice of my ministry or the ministry of any other Attorney General to release reports of investigations. And therefore, I'm not going to release it. If I, in my discharge of my responsibility, find that there are circumstances which justify the establishment of a judicial inquiry or other proceedings, then all that material will be turned over to the appropriate
It's quite usual,
forum.
of course, for hearsay matters to be investigated.
And they were in this case.
In every way?
In every way. Mr. Preluption is a very skilled, dedicated, and competent person who has no political involvement whatsoever in this matter. He is, in fact, quite incensed by the suggestions that have been made by some people that the work that he did was somehow or other influenced by political considerations.
Oh, I certainly wouldn't make that suggestion. The conclusions were drawn by your deputy, not by Mr. Preluption. Am I correct?
The report was made by the deputy, and the deputy made his report after extensive consultations with Mr. Preluption.
I can't resist this one, Mr. Williams. Was British Columbia Television correct when it reported, first of all, not in press reports, as the Deputy Attorney General's report said, that last-minute changes were made to the Eckert report after June the 17th, putting the finger onto Little Mountain? Was BCTV right when it first broke the story?
Yes, it was right. No question about it.
It certainly didn't deserve the condemnation and the attacks that were made on it, did it?
I'm not sure who condemned them or attacked them, but the results of the inquiry make it abundantly clear that the electoral boundary decisions with respect to the Vancouver ridings was made on the 18th and completed on the 19th and 20th.
You can't be happy about this situation, Mr. Williams, are you?
I don't like to have to deal with these matters, but I deal with them in accordance with the standards that are imposed upon me as Attorney General.
When you look at what else has been happening, Mr. Williams, you're going to stay in this job? Oh, that's an unfair question. I withdraw. I refer you to the problems we had with wrong election expenses returns. I refer you to the Ritchie affair. I refer you to the 7 members of the Social Credit Caucus who disappeared from office after the dirty tricks allegations. After the dirty tricks allegations. Yeah, are you proud of the standards set by the Social Credit Government of which you are Attorney General?
Yes, I am. When you speak about the dirty tricks affair and the people who were involved in as employees of the Social Credit Caucus, when their work didn't measure up to the standards that we consider to be appropriate, they either resigned or were terminated. And what else do you do in those circumstances except take that kind of action? You have mentioned a couple of matters, Jack, and I just can't allow it to pass. You have mentioned the Ritchie affair. The Ritchie affair was a police investigation and a decision made by senior officials in the Criminal Justice Division of the Ministry, and you can't draw that in and place that as a criticism of the government. There's no possible way that you can do that.
I can't let that pass either, Mr. Williams, because what Ritchie said, and I have the transcript, was this was an allegation of some little bit of, I suppose, influence peddling would be the right one. What I can only tell you, he told the radio reporter, if I was at the mercy of the RCMP and or the prosecutor, I wouldn't be in politics. If I did not have the sort of protection that there is through the Attorney General's department, then I would not be in public life.
Well,
that may have been a misguided statement, but that's what Richie said.
Well, I can't be made answerable for what I consider to be inaccurate and reaction on the part of Mr. Ritchie, who I'm aware was quite emotionally involved in this particular matter when he speaks about the protections of the Attorney General's ministry. The fact of the matter is that he was dealt with in accordance with the proper practices in the Criminal Justice Division and the law of this province and of this nation. And if that's what he means by the protection of the Attorney General's ministry, he's entitled to it along with everyone else without fear or favor, one way or the other. Well, those are the standards that I apply, and those are the standards that I will continue to apply. I don't care who it is, Jack. There is a standard that must be applied to people's conduct, and the chips will fall as they may. I can assure you of that.
I'll give you an honest question. Was the matter of allegations of interference in the administration of justice by senior officials ever finally disposed of? I'm talking about the court cases. I'm talking about the Rig affair and the other things. Were they cleaned up? Is that a dead dodo?
Yes, I believe that they've been settled. I don't think we can discuss this, although I would be delighted to, because there still is some misapprehensions about that particular matter.
You're talking about misapprehensions?
Yes, and...
you have misapprehensions?
No, I don't have any misapprehensions, but I think there are misunderstandings with respect to the matter, and I would just love to talk about it, but you are aware, it's quite clear that there is a matter pending before the courts of this province, and I can't talk about it.
What I'm reminding you,
I'd like to, but...
What I'm reminding you is the controversy that swirled around before your time, the Farris affair, the interference in cases in front of the courts alleged, the Ritchie affair, the dirty tricks, now the Gracie's Finger affair, and you tell me you're proud of the record of the government.
Well, but you
in handling these matters.
But just a minute, Jack. You want to involve the provincial government in the matters concerned with what you call the Farris affair. That is not a provincial government responsibility. It is the federal government responsibility. And I'm satisfied that the Attorney General, my predecessor, Mr. Gardam, during that period of time, acted quite properly within his responsibilities. There's no question about that.
Mr. Williams, I probably learned the phrase from you, certainly from a number of lawyers who've stuffed it down my throat for years, and politicians. You've certainly used this in the House. Not only must justice be done,
that's right,
it must be seen to be done. I can't understand why you, of all people, a man regarded as probably one of the most honorable men in public life, do not clear up the public apprehensions and concern by putting the people on the witness stand under oath, regardless, because it's been done before. I can name you royal commissions where hearsay, rumor, and everything else has been used to ease the public's mind that justice was being done. Why not?
And it will be in this case, Jack, if, as, and when I am able to link any of these indirect allegations with any evidence which would suggest that any person has been guilty of impropriety or criminal conduct in any of these affairs.
Would you give me one more short break to find out if I've missed any key questions?
Happy to, Jack.
After the break. I have not mentioned the famous meeting in the dining room, Mr. Williams, at Laurel Point Inn on, I think it was a Sunday.
With whom?
Eckhart, Chris McCarthy, and the commission staff member.
It was Monday night.
It was Monday night?
Yes.
Was that purely coincidence?
Absolutely, no question.
You're happy that it was purely coincidence?
Well, we've talked to the people who had taken Mrs. McCarthy to dinner. It was prearranged by them. They were going to dinner, and then they were going out to visit some Japanese sailing ship that was in the harbor.
We agreed that although the report was dated June the 17th, it was not in fact completed until after June the 17th. We agreed.
Correct.
Mr. Eckert told us all the work was done by June the 17th. Can you explain that?
No, I can't. It wasn't all done by June the 17th. When did he?
You would have. He told BCTV that.
That the work was all done by
June the 17th.
Wasn't all done by June the 17th.
Do I? You have no objection to Mr. Eckert, who might well be watching this program this morning, appearing on this program and answering questions, have you?
None whatsoever.
Mr. Eckert, if you're watching, I want to be fair to you. and I would like you, we shall call you, and I'd like you to appear on the program sometime at your earliest convenience so we can answer these questions. Ask these questions. Question. Is it clear, therefore, Mr. Williams, Attorney General of this province, that any further investigation designed to ease the public concern which exists must, if it's going to happen now, be initiated by someone outside the government?
No. Jack, during the discussion of these matters in the House, one of the members of the opposition said that this matter wouldn't go away. I stood in my place and said, of course it won't go away. These files are never closed in my ministry. We are pursuing the question of these oaths and the possibility of missing documents, how documents could become missing, if they're missing, what the consequences are. Jack, this matter is not closed. We've made the report in response to the Tomoto declaration of specific allegations of impropriety against Mrs. McCarthy, but the file is not closed as far as my ministry is concerned.
So you'll probably limp into the next election with this as a principal weapon with which you'll be beaten over the head and lose the election.
If that is the consequence of the discharge of my responsibilities, then I have to suffer that, Jack.
My thanks. Will you be running in the next election?
It's a long ways away, Jack. Will you be running in the next election?
Yes. But only here.
I understand you want to be the Attorney General.
If I were the Attorney General, the legal profession in this province would get such a shock from which it would never recover. My thanks to Attorney General Allan Williams. I'll be back with the fellow from Ontario. How did he get into the province? After the break. Before I introduce my guest, just give me a moment to relax. That's my first major entry into the Gracie's Finger affair. And you heard what Allan Williams said. File is not closed. But if he gets substantiation, he'll consider a public inquiry. I made it clear to Mr. Williams what my own views are as a reporter who's been around this province for 30-odd years, that I think the situation is so serious that regardless of the consequences to individuals, there should be public inquiry conducted by a judge on oath, by a judge taking the matters on oath. And I forgot to put to Mr. Williams the little thing that we got out of Locke and MacDonald the other day, the former Attorney General of the NDP, that if there is a judicial inquiry done in public and on oath, and if all those persons named in the implications are clear, they, Locke and MacDonald, would resign their seats in the legislature. There it is. Now my guest, and I gotta be nice to this fellow. Good morning, Mr. Grossman. Hi.
How are you, Jack? I bet you break that promise.
No, I won't. Laddie, I'll be so sickeningly nice you'll upchuck.
Well, I may upchuck, but we'll see why.
You're not by any chance a lawyer?
Of course I'm a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
Of course I am. But I've decided not to move to this province to practice in the event you ever become Attorney General.
If I were you, I would move to the... Although my son's a lawyer, I mustn't say that. I take it back. Larry Grossman is Minister of Tourism and Industry in Ontario, and he's had this cabinet position with that sparkling personality, Premier Bill Davis.
Right.
For the past 3 years. He's responsible for major legislation in Liquor Act changes, the Securities Act, and the new Condominium Act, roof over your head. And he's an ambassador carrying the message of interprovincial cooperation for the last year or so. You haven't been very successful because we all look down our noses at Ontario and think, oh, I wonder when they're going to have to turn out the lights. Your microphone, your camera, make your pitch.
Well, we aren't about to turn off the lights. In fact, if you look at Ontario's economic performance, it's excellent, particularly compared to its industrialized jurisdictions.
No bleeding wonder. Look at the tariff protection you've had for years. Look at the freight rate benefits you've had for years.
Listen, I had a little wager that it would take you 2.5 minutes to mention tariffs, and I won the wager. You came in under 2.5 minutes. Look,
really?
The question is, how are we doing lately? Because you suggest we're going to have to turn off the lights, as so many people do.
Only if Peter turns off the tap.
Well, Peter isn't going to turn off the tap, and we're not going to turn off the lights. And the whole suggestion that when Alberta does well or when BC does well, that means that Ontario, by definition, has to be doing badly, is Tommy rot. It's foolishness. Of course, in point of fact, one of the reasons we're going to do well are those very mega projects that you're talking about out here. That's terrific for us.
What's a mega project?
Oh, that's Alberta Ease for the tar sands projects.
Yeah, it is a mess, though, isn't it?
Which is?
Interprovincial cooperation and the Constitution.
Oh, yeah, that's why I've been out talking about it, and that's why I'm out here today, as a matter of fact.
You've got to sell us on it, really, because, I mean, the Constitution here, you couldn't raise a crowd of 3 people in Robson Square if you wanted to talk. I mean, 3 ordinary people. I'm not talking about professional loudmouths like us.
No, like us who?
Like us, you and me.
Oh, well, I may not join you in that.
No, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That on patriation of the Constitution, we have this happy picture of Mr. Trudeau. Somebody's doing a low growl on the set. We have this happy picture of Mr. Trudeau saying, I want interprovincial cooperation, but by God, I'm going to bring back the Constitution anyway. Is that any way to run the country?
Well, look, on the level in which I'm responsible, which is industrial cooperation, I guess what I've been saying is that all the rewriting of the constitutional rules, as it were, ain't going to work much, to use the expression, ain't going to work if there isn't a spirit of cooperation and if we can't show each other that there's something in it for each province.
Who's going to stop?
Well, that's what we've tried to do, and I must say we have had some success. I got all of the 9 other provinces to agree to join us last week in a healthcare project where we're trying to give manufacturers of health supply equipment, healthcare products in Canada, preferred and primary access to Canada's healthcare market. In Canada, just take a small example, Jack. It's about...
Give me that again, Mr. Grossman. 9 other provinces to cooperate in a healthcare project. We were trying to get the manufacturers to work.
Of needles, of syringes.
Outside?
No. What we have in Canada is a market for healthcare products.
Right.
Of about $1 billion. 70% of that market is supplied by imported goods. 70%.
Oh.
And that is absolutely ridiculous. Now, in BC, there's a fair number, not an overwhelming number, but a number of firms that are in that business of supplying those products. But you know what? They aren't able to sell effectively into markets that are 2,000-3,000 miles away from them in eastern Canada.
And you're willing to help?
That's right.
Now,
of course, you want to know what I want in return.
Yeah, what do you want in return?
Exactly the same thing. We have lots of those manufacturers in Ontario that aren't selling into the British Columbia market. And mostly the interesting thing, Jack, is that these firms aren't competing against each other. Mostly they're not in the same products. What they are competing against is the Americans. So what's happening is the Americans coming into our market, competing and winning in our market, and we're not doing anything in Canada to join our markets together to try and help each other's firms get better access.
That's a fair point. To be deadly serious for a moment, though, Lougheed's position, and this comes right into your portfolio, I think. The provincial potentates in the West, and I'm talking about Bennett and Lougheed, not Blakeney so much, certainly Sterling Lyon, or whatever his name is, are making a great case that the West, especially Alberta, has been robbed of oil at subsidized prices to the tune of, what, $3 billion a year through federal taxes to keep Ontario industry going?
Well,
Ontario on the east.
Yeah.
That's their case. What's wrong with that case? Why don't you pay an economic price for the oil so the western provinces can get every last nickel out of it?
I think if you look at the situation, what we're saying is that we can pay the price. It's the last part of what you said, which is so that the western provinces can get every last penny out of it, that gives Canada as a nation a lot of problems, I think. Because the question is, what's going to happen with all that money? Is it going to be hived off?
Are we a nation or are we not a nation? You're right.
Well, that's the question.
And I've got to give Ontario a piece of backhanded compliment. I just picked up a little piece the other day that Ontario, unlike Alberta or British Columbia, qualifies for the poverty payments from the equalization funds. But Ontario, God bless it, has refused to take the equalization payments. Am I correct?
Well, under the old rules, we would have qualified for receipt of equalization payments. We agreed with the federal government to an altering of the rules because however you look at the numbers, the net effect of the equalization payment system was to have provinces like Ontario with a lot of industrial wealth paying out, not recipients, regardless of what the balance sheet said. So we agreed that whatever the numbers showed, we should still be paying.
Yeah, if we don't do equalization, I think ordinary people don't realize this. If we don't do equalization payments from the have to the have-not provinces, the poverty places in Eastern Canada are going to starve to death.
Of course. I think it's interesting, Jack, that
Will
over
you
the
hold
years...
your breath in that?
Yes, sure.
Barry Grossman? I'm running late. After the break. My guest now is Larry Grossman, who is the Minister of Tourism and Industry in Ontario. And he is quite widely regarded as a possible successor to Davis standing in the wing. And February 13th is Davis's 10th anniversary, and every 10 years in Ontario, by rote, they changed leaders. Are you in the wings?
Only to the extent that I'm one of the other ministers.
How old are you?
36.
How long have you been in politics?
5 years.
Married?
Yep.
Going to stay in politics?
And married, yes.
Power corrupts, doesn't it?
Corrupts?
Yeah.
Not in Ontario.
What you get as an Ontario cabinet minister?
About $50,000.
50,000. Much of it tax-free, of course.
Well, not too much of it.
Not too much. A little bit
a bit
tax-free.
Let me put it this way: less than I could be making practicing law.
Oh, much less than you could be making practicing law.
My wife reminds me from time to time.
You're practically on welfare compared to a successful lawyer.
Well, let's not overstate the case.
No. Now, quite
too many
serious.
lawyers, you know that.
Seriously again, what are you going to do about this disastrous situation with the automobile industry in Oshawa? How many unemployed? What can you do? Or are you going to close down shop and forget it?
Well, I don't think we'll close down shop and forget it. I think one of the things we have to do, I think, Jack, is keep some perspective on the problem.
How bad is it?
Well, relatively speaking, it's not too bad in Canada. In the United States, there are currently 270,000 auto workers laid off. In Canada, we now have about 10,000.
That's a lot.
Well, it is, but the ratio of markets is about 10 to 1. So they have far, far greater percentage layoffs.
What's the future?
Than we do. Well, the future is not too bad, and I'll tell you why. Firstly, GM has now got only about less than 1,000 people laid off in Canada. Ford has a few more thousand. Most of the layoffs in Canada are Chrysler, in fact. Mm-hmm. Take Chrysler out of the situation, that isn't going to improve a heck of a lot. But Ford and GM are beginning to recover their share of the market. It's going to take a year and a half, no question about it. More importantly, and the less visible side of the industry, is the auto parts side. And the auto parts side has a tremendous opportunity in Canada, Jack, because it is moving towards what's called a world car. I don't know if a lot of people hear the slogan, a world car, everyone's going to a world car. What it means is that North Americans are going to be producing the same kind and style and weight of car that Europeans and Japanese are making and have been making for a long time. That means one simple thing. The 400 or 500 auto parts firms in Canada, which used to sell only to Detroit for the big three, are now going to be making auto parts that can fit into Fiats and Volkswagens.
Mazda, Datsun.
Yeah, they're going to fit those cars. It's going to be the same weight.
What you're telling me, therefore, is it's not really practical for you to go and borrow money from the feds or your own people and start making a Canadian car.
Only if we're prepared to put billions of dollars into it, and that's terribly inefficient. Better way.
You're saying that the way to go is to make the universal parts for the universal world car.
That's right, and Canada has strengths in precisely the products that those world car parts need. Plastic, aluminum, and light steel. Three historic strengths of Canada, and that's why it's really a tremendous opportunity for us.
I'm sorry you mentioned steel. I have a friend who's fairly big in the steel business, and you should hear him rant and rave about Ontario, Quebec protectionism on light steel.
On light steel?
On angle iron and all kinds of stuff.
With the exception of one case that I'm aware of, where an anti-dumping action was commenced on behalf of an Ontario steel company, I have to tell you that it's acknowledged worldwide that Canadian steel needs no protection. In fact, it's tremendously competitive. In fact, we're putting a lot of American steel firms under. That's why I see all the trouble.
One of the problems out here, the housewives type of problem, is that to protect your 300,000 jobs, or is it 30,000, I'm not sure, in the textile industry in Quebec and Ontario, we have import quotas here. On the $5 pair of runners from Taiwan becomes $17.95.
Yeah.
you know, the woman in the house in British Columbia, the person, forgive me, I'm being discriminatory.
Yeah, be careful.
Gets bloody very angry at protectionism of Canadian textile industry for T-shirts and jeans, and she gets put through the nose for it. Can't that, must we save your jobs with tariff protection on textiles?
Well, I'll make a couple of points. Firstly...
Do I know what I'm talking about?
You've got the outlines of the situation.
Good enough, we'll do it after the break. The Honourable Larry Grossman, Ontario's Minister. First Ontario Cabinet Minister I've spoken to since I did Davis at a press conference about 10 years ago. He's going to explain to us why the textile industry in Quebec and Ontario must be protected so that we have to pay more for imported stuff.
I don't think it must be, Jack. I think it's a decision for all of Canada to make. I guess I just argue this. Firstly, the situation throughout the world is almost every major industrialized nation protects its textile industry.
True.
Essentially, they make that decision because the countries that make textiles and are in that business for $1 a day, with wages at $1 a day, can drive us all out of business. So a conscious decision's been made not just by the citizens of Canada, but by the citizens of the United States, West Germany, and everywhere else in industrialized jurisdictions, that among its industries, the one that's got to be protected and maintained is that industry. And so you saw a whole round of tariff negotiations conclude last year, all sorts of tariff changes. Free trade coming, tariff barriers lowered substantially. The one thing that all of those countries agreed upon was that the textile industries essentially should keep their tariffs. Now, why did all of them say that? Well, they presume on behalf of their citizens, rightly or wrongly, that the numbers of jobs involved in the textile industry are important in each of their countries, and it's an industry that simply can't survive very much tariff change. Now, why should British Columbians or Westerners pay extra money to protect our jobs in Eastern Canada? I guess it's pretty simple. 2 points. Of course, Ontarians pay extra money too. We're paying the extra tariff costs. And secondly, I have some trouble with this concept that somehow jobs in Ontario are our jobs and not your jobs. I just look at them as Canadian jobs. I hope I'd be saying the same thing if I were Minister of Industry here in BC.
Yeah, but look at that caper you had with Quebec.
Which caper was that?
One of your two provinces, Ontario or Quebec, or both or either, or in retaliation said, and Newfoundland's doing the same thing now, you cannot work.
Well, that's exactly.
You can't have priority to work in the construction industry unless you're a resident of this province.
Well, that's precisely what's happening.
Is that still the case?
Well, that's the case, and that's the case I've been arguing against for, I guess, almost a year now.
That's awful.
I find it shocking, Jack. You know, in Newfoundland.
Who started it? Quebec.
Quebec started it. Newfoundland has recently come in saying all jobs in the oil rigs shall go to Newfoundlanders. And now Nova Scotia signed in, strangely, saying that if you want to apply for jobs in civil service, you have to live in Nova Scotia. Now, to me, that's the very antithesis of everything we're talking about.
Of a nation.
Of a nation. You know what? You know, it's strange. I was in Fort McMurray, Alberta, to look at the tar sands projects last February. Go to Fort McMurray, town 25,000, existing solely for the tar sands project. 1/3 of the population there comes from Newfoundland. They've benefited from freedom of movement of manpower. Yet Newfoundland, when they begin their oil projects, are saying only Newfoundlanders are going to work here. Do we have a country or not?
No, on that basis, we don't have a country. I agree with you entirely on that.
Likewise to tariffs. There are prices we all pay. I pay it as an Ontarian. And I have to say, on behalf of Ontarians, I'd like to hear what further prices we have to pay in order to stay in Confederation. I think you'll find we're willing to pay them, including oil prices.
In other words,
equitable arrangements can be worked.
If you have to, you'll go along with Peter the Red's plan to bring Canada up to 85% of the Chicago price.
There's a very simple question behind it. How do you accomplish that without creating uncontrollable inflation and without deepening the recession in Canada?
Mass
if there's an
unemployment,
answer to it.
mass unemployment, and giving the Yanks an advantage.
Well, that's the point. That's exactly the point. Now, that's the part that,
you make me sound
Peter
like a
hasn't been able to deal
nationalist.
with. You're a great Canadian, Jack.
I'm not supposed to sound like a nationalist.
You're a great Canadian.
I'm supposed to hate you
that.
people. That's good, though. I must say, it's an interesting way to look at it. What else? 5 minutes. We'll take some phones. I'm
Sure,
going to
let's
go
do
to the
that.
phones this morning.
Like to. Let's hear what's
Because, I mean, for an Ontario person, you seem quite nice. Some of my best friends are from Ontario. I had another point, but I've lost it. What the hell? Never wasn't.
You're carrying on about how nice Ontarians are.
Except for the media.
You don't.
We strongly resent. Take this message back.
I'll take it, but won't take ownership of it.
Strongly resent the piggy-eyed centralization by both networks of Canadian news coverage. You think the world began and ended in Ottawa and in Toronto, wouldn't you?
I'll take a tape of your remarks.
No,
back.
the great failure of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and to some extent, not nearly to such an extent, of CTV, is their unwillingness, inability to do anything to knit this country together.
Let me just make a comment on that, Jack.
You agree with
one
me?
One of the things.
No, he doesn't.
Yes, I do.
Well,
I should never agree fully with any of your statements.
Because they're
I
extravagant.
agree with exactly. I agree with the sentiment. The sentiment is this, and one which I share. You've got all sorts of Canadians throughout this country who are suddenly experts on everything from oil pricing to rewriting the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And very few of those Canadians have visited, have been to, have read about, have learned about, know about the other parts of the country. And how they can presume in a country as diverse and as large as our country is to be experts on how British Columbians feel about central Canada or about tariffs, or how Newfoundlanders feel about protecting their own jobs is a mystery to me. But it's not if you've walked the streets of St. John's or you've spent some time in BC as I have. But unless you do that or convey it through the media.
I've never been in Newfoundland. I've been most of Eastern Canada. I used to think until recently that Ontario was a town of black snow and dirty buildings.
Not so.
Because I was only in to do Front Page Challenge now again. I withdraw it. I went to a friend's place on Balsam Lake at Indian Point.
Great
Copaconk.
Copaconk.
Near Copaconk.
One of the great tourist spots in
Beautiful place. Only problem is that they complain about these snowmobiles in the winter with people cutting their heads off on the guy wires.
Well, you know, government looks after that. We've got a law against that.
I'm going to go to the phones. Is there a phone call for Larry Grossman here now, Gladys? From Prince Rupert.
Hello, Jack. How you doing?
Speak up, I can't hear you.
Speak up.
Hello, Jack. How are you doing today?
Good. You want to speak to Mr. Grossman?
Yeah, I do. I tell you what really bothers me is the guys back there in the east, they figure we should pay for their textiles through the nose, and when we're trying to get our Ridley Island deals going, they're damned if they want to even help us get that going. We get nothing but complaints.
What's Whidbey Island? You mean the pulp mill deal?
Well, not just the pulp mill, but our coal depot and our grain depot that we're trying to put in Ridley Island there.
Who's they? Who's they? I don't know of any of my constituents who don't think you should do that.
There, and especially Ottawa, you know, you don't want to help us get our...
Tell them who you are. Just a minute, Prince Rupert. Tell them who you are.
Prince Rupert, I am the Minister of Industry for Ontario, and I think one of the problems, one of the frustrations for us, is that people in BC, I should never generalize, but too many people in BC, let me put it that way, believe that Ontario and the Ontario government and the Ontario people are synonymous with the incredible bureaucracy and the Liberal government in Ottawa.
Thanks,
old
boy. Question, do your civil servants have index pensions?
Yeah, no, they do not.
I ask you, witness, to consider your answer again. Do your civil servants not have index pensions to cost of living?
No, they are adjusted regularly by us.
To the cost of living?
Well, sometimes fully to the cost of living, sometimes not. But they're not automatic. There's no COLA clause.
Are your civil servants leading the field in clerical employment, wages, and other leading the field in terms of money?
Well, not when you've got the Ottawa bureaucracy. I mean, no one can.
They lead the field.
Got to be.
More calls to Larry Grossman, Minister of Tourism and Industry.
Industry and Tourism.
Says here, it's wrong.
I swear, I'll show you my card.
Minister of Industry and Tourism from Queen's Park, Tirana, after the break. Go ahead to Larry Grossman.
Yes, Jack.
Yep.
I wanted to speak to Larry, but did Allan Williams tell you he didn't want any phone calls?
No, I had no time for phone calls. We went, instead of doing 20 minutes, we did 45 minutes. And don't worry, you'll be back after the Constitution for phone calls.
Yeah.
Bye from Ottawa.
Okay, now, Jack, to Mr. Grossman.
Yeah.
Could he, as Minister of Industry, tell me how many brick shares are being traded on the Toronto market?
Don't know offhand. Fairly active.
Fairly active.
I believe so.
Now, I understood when brick came out that everybody was confined to 5,000 shares.
No, let's not get into that because Larry wouldn't know the details. I'd have to look it up. The bulk of the shares are still held in British Columbia. We were all disappointed that Kaiser Steel went up to 53 yesterday and brick dropped a couple of cents.
Isn't this strange?
It is strange.
Boy.
Alert Bay to Larry Grossman from Queen's Park, Toronto.
Thank you. Mr. Grossman?
Yes.
I'm not so worried about the jobs or the tariffs in the textile industry as much as the quality of clothing.
Yeah.
Especially in children's clothing. I find that the Canadian-made clothing seems to be inferior and needs repairing quickly after you buy it, and whereas some of the imported ones that are much better quality. And I was wondering if you could answer that question, what we can do about assuring ourselves better quality in the Canadian textile industry.
Sure I can, and I speak from experience because my father-in-law is in the baby clothes business in in Toronto. I'll give him the plug, won't give you the name. Mm-hmm. Essentially...
it's not Grossman and Son,
no,
no.
My father-in-law is.
Oh, father-in-law,
yes. Listen, I think that's a very valid point because I think it's fair for governments and their taxpayers to say to the textile industry, we'll pay for the protection in terms of dollars, but we expect quality for the dollars. And if you're not getting the quality, I think it's time for the government to look back at the textile industry, whose protection comes up, by the way, every 3 years for renewal by the federal government in terms of the quotas, and say to that textile industry, okay, you've got to improve your quality or we're going to remove the protection.
Well,
that's a fair deal.
What's the point of complaining to the manufacturer? Will he do anything?
Well, I must say, there's a new, from the manufacturers I know in the textile industry, Jack, there is a new generation come in the last, 2 or 3 years that does seem to be moving to computer-aided manufacturing, updating equipment, and
if it's an Ontario firm, can she write to you?
No question about it.
Larry Grossman, Minister of Industry and Tourism, Queen's Park, Toronto. Thank you. Go ahead, please. No, wrong one. Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Hello.
That's you.
Yeah, it's me. Say, Jack, I think you should go down to Newfoundland and Nova Scotia.
Speak up. You're whispering again.
You're right, he should.
That's better. Go ahead.
It's appalling down there. The unemployment situation in Newfoundland is 38%. In Nova Scotia, it's in the 20s. As of August, they laid off 1,200 men in Sydney Steel Plant, and they promised Cape Bretoners that they're going to open a new mine in Duncan, and that won't be in production until '86. Now, why take in other people from other provinces with all that unemployment?
Well, nobody's going to really go to Nova Scotia to look for a job anyway, unless they're a specialist in some field, are they?
Yeah, well, what are you complaining about them sticking to Nova Scotia?
Well, we're complaining that across this country there must be freedom of movement for people to look for jobs. Otherwise, all the Newfies wouldn't have got the jobs in Alberta.
Yeah, well, they're going to have them down there.
Listen, I agree with Jack. I think the effectiveness of what Newfoundland's doing is very much questionable because Newfoundlanders are going to get the first jobs that come up, and people will only move from Alberta or Ontario to Newfoundland when they haven't got a job in their home province and when there's a job going begging in Newfoundland. It's the principle, which is absolutely the antithesis of everything this nation stands for.
Or should stand for.
Should stand
but
for.
Presently doesn't stand
Well, I think it does if some people would let it. I think the citizens
one of Trudeau's great strengths is that he knows perfectly well the man in the street is all for a nation.
Yes, that's right. I agree with you.
Go ahead, please.
Bruce Wally, Richmond, Jack.
Yes, Bruce.
Newsweek, September the 8th, page 67, winning with investment. First paragraph, the last sentence. I quote to Mr. Grossman. The textile trade is booming. Several leading fabric makers have doubled their productivity rates in the past decade, and they now compete favorably with the same low-cost foreign producers that once threatened to drive them out of business. That's one. Two, the industry in the States has spent $1 billion in the 1970s to upgrade their industry to make it competitive with Taiwan, for instance. Three, textiles are moving from a labor-intensive industry to a capital-intensive.
That's what he said. And your point is that the Canadian textile manufacturers don't need protection.
They don't need protection. They only smartened up.
Well, listen, my consumers are paying that extra cost too, and the moment at which they don't need that protection, we'll be the first ones to say, let's remove it. We're paying extra money too.
Good call. Go ahead from Campbell River.
Yes, I was wondering if these tariffs we were speaking of, like the shoes at $5 a piece, and going up the price of $17.
Right.
Is that subsidizing the textile industry in Ontario?
To some extent, is it
To
not?
some extent. Let's put it this way. It's subsidizing the textile industry in Canada.
Okay, I just wondered how much was going straight to the...
No, that's not all going straight to the textile industry. That's just not a... You can't make that calculation.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to know from Mr. Grossman, who is Ministry of Industry and Tourism, do the Chrysler loan guarantees not ensure greater employment by the Chrysler Corporation and less layoffs? Because if it doesn't ensure that, then why give them the loan guarantees?
Well, Ontario refused to give them the loan guarantees, as you'll recall. The federal government went ahead. I was the negotiator for Ontario, and I agreed with your position. I said that I didn't think loan guarantees were required and that we couldn't get job guarantees in exchange, and therefore we withdrew. What Ontario did do, what I agreed to do, was put up $10 million towards a $20 million research and development center, if, as, and when built. And if Chrysler goes under, then Ontario will own that research and development center. The problem with Chrysler, of course, is you don't know if they're going to be in business a year from today or 2 years from today. Exactly. And if they are, how large a company it's going to be.
So it was Grossman who said, no, I will not subsidize jobs unless you guarantee the jobs.
Well, that's right. We clearly backed out of the deal and said no.
Good call. Thank you very much. One more call. Where shall I go? Go ahead, please. I did that one. Are you there?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Grossman, will you put on your Minister of Tourism hat for a moment?
Sure. Got
Short question, short answer.
Okay. Stratford, one of the biggest tourist attractions in Ontario, if not in Canada. They have said that they're very close to going under. Will you offer them any further help from the Ontario government directly to prevent that
the government has
disaster from happening?
We have sorted that problem out with Stratford. They appear to be over the crisis now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My thanks to Larry Grossman. Nice fellow from Ontario, Minister of Tourism, Industry and Tourism.
Right.
See you again.
Thanks,
Give my
Jack.
regards to Tirana. After the break. I am sure you will want to watch the Marathon of Hope, which is a 6-hour fundraising event on CTV on Sunday, beginning at 4 p.m. Be carried nationally for the first 4 hours, plus 2 more hours locally. And this is, of course, a tribute to Terry Fox. A Loomis van will be parked in front of BCTV on Enterprise in Burnaby, in Lake City, and viewers are challenged to drive by and fill it with money for cancer research. His condition is unchanged since yesterday. His spirits are good. No fever in the past 24 hours. The bone scan yesterday was negative. He's being prepared for chemotherapy. Monday, Gladys.
Senator Perot.
Ray Perot.
Senator Ray
My
Perot.
old antagonist, my old buddy on the Constitution.
And whatever else.
I'll tell you what else we will use Monday, too. I'm going to use, for Fort Nelson's benefit, Andrew Shuck, the lawyer who acted for the Fort Nelson Indian Band. That's Monday, 9 a.m. precisely. Thank you.
Benson, back this fall.
Right. 5 seconds.
I gotta do your microphone there. That's a good shot.
That was first class, especially the first 45 minutes.
He was very quiet.
I didn't pull a punch.
Oh, it was there.